So wherever you search in Neos and Flow, you're going to find his name. He just told me he wrote like the first package manager before there even was Composer, before it even existed. So please welcome on stage Christopher Hlubek from Kiel.
Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, 1 year of Neos and Zebra projects. Every zebra has a unique stripe pattern. You might have heard of that. And this pattern is never replicated across another zebra. And I think that the web and digital experiences that we build are similar. Many of them are very individual, and I think most of what we here do cannot easily be done by installing a system and just clicking together a few plugins and configuring them. So, which brings me to our initial motivation for building Zebra. And it was to see if we can use Neos as a headless CMS in combination with a modern new front-end / full-stack framework. It's a little bit hard to find the right words, different terms for that, but I'll explain a little bit more. So we already had some experience in using Next.js, and it was and is still quite popular, so it was a natural choice for this kind of framework to choose. And you might ask, but why not use Neos as it is? And it's really a question you should ask yourself if you heard some other talks today. And but I'm convinced that the web experiences we are building now and in the future need to adapt. And with a full-stack framework like Next.js, the interesting part is that front-end and back-end parts can converge in interesting ways. If you have a look at this, before we had the center of gravity, which is really a nice term to see it, as our CMS. Everything resolved around it in many installations or architectures, and you integrated all the different data sources there, implemented authentication there, and whatever, importing data. And with a new paradigm, it can be more loosely coupled, and with Next.js, for example, there are more interesting things that there's not much distinction between front-end and back-end. You can use code in both layers and have much more possibilities. And you're less thinking in terms of extending a system with plugins, packages, and other mechanisms, and you actually own more of the stack. And this gives you more degrees of freedom. And for me, this, it comes with more abstraction and complexity, so naturally we should again ask, why should we use it? And for me, it's about leveraging the innovation that also comes from the front-end space and actually establishing more scenarios where we can use Neos where we maybe couldn't use Neos before. So we will have more possibilities where Neos fit and what we can create with it. And we can provide a better experience for users and developers. That was our motivation and is our mission for doing that. And what is Zebra actually? So first of all, we have an NPM package that is called Zebra. And that is what you install in Next.js. And this Next.js package basically enables you to build a front end in Next.js. And all the rendering is done with React components. And these React components fetch, or Next.js fetches data from Neos. We have a content API in Neos. And then you generate the front end in React. No rendering in Fusion. And for the content API, we have a package called Content API, which is a basic building block for that. And it provides a very basic HTTP API. It's nothing fancy like a GraphQL thing, but it works reasonably well. And the idea is that we include everything you need to render a document in the front end in one response. And the nice thing with Fusion is that you can extend it. So you can customize it with your own values, meta information, or add things you need for your rendering. And The Zebra package on the Next.js part provides a bunch of React components and helpers that we can then use to render our content and documents. And if we use them, they will output metadata for the Neos UI. This is the really tricky part, that we imitate the rendering of Neos. So if the UI in the content module fetches now a front end from Next.js, not from Neos, we have the metadata returned from the content API if you are authenticated, and the goal is the Neos UI behaves the same like before. Actually, that works. Last year, it still was a question if we can do it, but it works. And this way, you have the same great editing experience you know from Neos, and basically, an editor won't notice. Maybe it's a little bit more performant, but you can select content elements, you can edit text, edit inspector properties, publish, just with a normal Neos installation. And of course, we have some kind of caching, because we all like caching. And Next.js caches generated responses, so we don't have to hit the content API on every request. And yeah, now we have to notify Next.js if content was updated and published. So we have revalidation, which it is called in Next.js. If in Neos we publish content, Next.js gets notified and can invalidate cached entries. So we have the full editing cycle basically working like we know. And for this caching and revalidation, we have the third part, which makes the whole Zebra solution which is a pretty tiny package called Network Team Neos Next. And this hooks into the publishing signal and makes the API call to Zebra. We have some multi-site handling there. Yeah, but it's not too fancy. It's just a basic building block. So we now had a look at what Zebra actually is. But before looking at all the new exciting things, I want to show you some actual projects that are using Zebra. And by the way, this is me last year in Berlin talking about the first iteration of Zebra. And back then, we were interested if the approach was useful for others, and we presented our ideas and on how to integrate Neos and Next.js. And before that, we had one very basic first customer site to gain experience in production. It's really not fancy, but we already had some requirements for multi-site and multi-language installation, so we at least got the basics right for the API to support that. And then Philip, one of our team members, contributed a lot to Zebra and successfully used it in a few of his personal projects. For example, the Kiel Seahawks, a baseball club that has quite some features and was a good training ground to get the first version of the API right and use it in a real project. There's also a site for dog school that offers training activities and other support for dog owners. And at Network Team, we used Zebra to build the site for the Kieler Wirtschaftsförderung, or Kiwi in short. And yeah, this is a Neos site of average size with semantic content types, references, and we actually switched to Zebra in the beginning of the project. We first had a traditional setup, but yeah, we wanted to use the Zebra workflow in the front end. And maybe there will be future extensions with integrations where it really plays out that we have the possibilities. And even more exciting than that is the chance to prove the concept outside of our agency. So we were very happy to get contacted by Benno from Format D and Lorenz from Visol. And Lorenz and his team are using Zebra for the relaunch of swissvolley.ch. And this is in a work of progress state for the styling, as he said, so it's not finished yet. But I wanted to show it. Thank you, I can. And there are features like a game center with more dynamic data, and which is a good fit for Next.js, and also a lot of content, for example, in the knowledge base. And the MyHogast project that Benno and his team are working on is really special. So we started there with a proof of concept phase in the last year, whether we can integrate Neos in an existing Next.js app. So and this app is built by another IT company, and they were looking for a headless CMS solution with good editing. at least the customer had the requirement. And the challenge was to build this upon the new app router architecture and include content in different parts of the application. So we really have a mixture of more content-heavy pages, business logic with big B2B ordering processes, and content could be edited everywhere. Yeah, and here we see a home screen with a mix of offers and quick access to different parts. And it's a purchasing association. Maybe some of you heard of that. And it's quite a big system. There's a knowledge base with quite some content that comes from Neos with more details, and there are news. So it's more to say about that, but it's really an interesting project, and we could use it to make Zebra fit for the app router, to see how we can implement that for this mixed architecture. And yeah, from the Zebra part, it played out really well. But meanwhile, in Next.js, there were a lot of releases with new features. And I think you can see how fast the pace of innovation is right now if we have a look at that. For example, version 13.4, which came out shortly after the NeosCon, I think, last year, introduced the app router and React server components in a stable version. And what is the big deal about it? I want to tell you a little bit more about it to understand that. So if you have a look at the pages router, which was the traditional Next.js pattern of doing things, you access a route, then it hits the server, which is Next.js. It basically fetches data from somewhere, or you don't fetch data, then it's a little bit boring. You use some kind of server-side rendering. Maybe you cache it as a static rendering, so it's already cached for the next hit. Then that is sent to the client. The client loads pre-rendered HTML and JS. But then again, it has to be re-rendered on the client, which is called rehydration, which takes some time if you have a larger page. And you are pretty bound to this workflow. It's a little bit hard to make it more dynamic and introduce different data fetching patterns. So, and in the end, you get the result. With the app router and React server components, we have many new paradigms that we can use. And it can be used in parallel to the pages router, which is a good thing to migrate to it and to have some kind of backward compatibility. And the main data fetching pattern is to write React server components. And these are async and can directly fetch data. So what we do now is we hit a route, which goes to the server. We can do a fetch or database load, whatever, any async call in one of these React server components, render the output. And this can be done many times. Then return the initial HTML to the client, and then we can stream in the results while they are loading, which is pretty interesting. This is how such a component might look. It's straight from the Next.js docs. And the interesting part is that it can happen multiple times in a nested layout and for different data fetching requirements. And the next interesting part is these components never leave the server, so we don't have to load them in the JS that is shipped to the client and read-write, you know what I mean. So only the rendered HTML is streamed, and that is, of course, much better if you have large payloads and you ship less JavaScript. And if you use suspense, which is another React feature, as a boundary, you can choose where to show a loading indicator and stream in the results later. So you can show an initial result, stream in results in another part later, and this can be mixed. It's really crazy what you can do. You have to learn it. But so you want to use server components for everything you can for the given benefits. That was clear after we worked with it for some time. But everything that interacts in the client or changes state while your site is running needs to be a client component, a traditional React component. So we have some kind of interleaving, and you have two ways of doing things, and you need to compose your app. And there's an important thing, though. though server components can use client components, and they can pass server components as children of client components, but you can't do it the other way around. So it's a little bit, you have to restructure your app code to take care of that, but then it works out pretty well. And you have a composition of these two kinds of components. It looks a little bit like a zebra, I think. So yeah, then we have a few more versions. So Next.js here, which is developed by Vercel, really has a fast pace of doing new stuff. And of course, if they first ship an experimental or beta feature, it's maybe a little bit unfinished. So maybe wait a little bit, but they are really doing a lot for performance optimization and integrating new features from React. And yeah, so next big thing will be Next.js 15. Not so much of an architecture change like with the app router, but we have a React 19, and this will have a React compiler. So without rewriting anything, you will get better performance, basically, which is a nice thing. And by using Next.js, we don't have to change our app because we get this integration with the compiler and everything basically for free. We know upgrading is a little bit of a hassle. We have one dependency more, which itself has hundreds of dependencies, but I think Next.js does an okay job of abstracting that, so you don't have to manage a whole dependency stack. So, what is new in Zebra? We basically now have full support for app router and React server components, so you can do the full front-end rendering in server components. And we had to change the API a little bit since the first version. And we try to keep it as close as possible so you can work in the same way. And I show you some code to illustrate that. Here, for example, we have a page route that renders all the dynamic paths, which is basically the document nodes from Neos. And we import from a new package called Network Team Zebra Server. So the new Zebra version ships the old code and the new code in parallel. So we have some kind of backwards compatibility for now. And for the data loading, we offer some data loader helpers, for example, to load the document properties from the content API. You pass in a slug. Yeah, it's a little bit simplified example here. Basically, we need a dynamic parameter there. And in the end, we call something like a node renderer, which knows how to render that based on our React components. And for that to work, we have some kind of registry where you define for every node type which React component is needed to render it, or is rendering it. And we have a function init node types now, which we didn't have before. It was a little bit more unclear, more convention-based. Now we have a real function here. And here you can see we have a document. All the documents are basically using a single React component which renders a document page. And if we have a look at that page, we use a layout, which is just another custom server component. So it's not from Zebra, it's just how we structured that in the demo. And then we're using a content collection. And but we also have a special root layout. And this is new with the app router, and it solves some issues because you have full control over the HTML and body tag. Root layout is a little bit special because it is not re-rendered on navigation. But this is basically the entry point where you include your CSS, fonts, whatever, and declare where the child components from the routes go. And so finally, let's have a look at a content component. This is a basic headline, and this uses a presentational component, and it renders the headline node type. again, we import from network team Zebra server. We have a new call, await with node. We pass a context. More about that later. And this basically is the data loading again happening. So if you maybe had a look at Zebra before, we had a use node hook, but server components can't use hooks. We have to do async calls, so we also changed the signature, and that is how we came up with node. And we pass, we use a content component like you do in Fusion to wrap your stuff for the backend metadata. We use editable where things are editable. So again, we try to mimic how you would do the rendering in Neos, so it's pretty familiar on how to do that. So now for this mysterious context. So we receive a context and we pass it down to other server components. This is because it's a little bit sad that we don't have something like use context in server components. It initially was in there behind an experimental thingy, but they actually took it out. So we had to come up with something, and the only thing that really works is to pass down the context, which has a benefit because you can modify it, you can put in your own data and pass it down to other components. But right now with server components, yeah, that's the way it is. It's a little bit overhead, but it's not too bad. And there's a big trick involved here, because if you would have a look, every component actually fetches the content API. But Next.js deduplicates fetch calls. So if you have one request and you do multiple fetch calls with the same parameters, they all get deduplicated into one fetch call. This is what we took advantage of. We only pass the minimal metadata in the context about the route path you're in, the node identifier that we loaded, document node identifier, and all the other stuff is directly happening in the server components. So if you have a look at the front-end code, we don't pass a lot of data between components, which was a little bit worse in the previous version of Zebra. So it's pretty clean here. Yeah, like I said, it's memoized in one route request, and if you want to access node data, we find the data for a node by node identifier from the context, and this is why we have all these helpers. This is a complete list. You don't have to learn that right now. This is a list of the components and helpers for data loading and for accessing the data. So I think by looking at the demo applications we have, it gets clear. Yeah, and we have easier revalidation with App Router. It's much easier, and we can use different caching options in fetch calls, including tags. And the nice thing compared to the Pages router is that we don't have to wait until routes are revalidated, because the Pages router really, we call it revalidate. You had to wait until the new version was built again. So if you have a few hundred nodes, that is a problem. That is why we built a custom queue to do it, and you can basically get rid of that in an App Router project because it's happening lazy, which is a good thing. We can just, like in Flow, flush caches. It will get rebuilt on the next hit. If you want, you can do some warm-up strategy, but out of the box, it should be good enough for many things. So all of this is now released as version 1.0. And we feel pretty confident that you can use it. Okay, here are the zebras. Yeah, good job. Okay, I think that was I think this was the reminder for a one more thing moment. So to start, we now have a nice landing page that our team built, and you find an overview of what Zebra is and how to get started, where to find packages. Of course, it's only the first version, and we maybe integrate more documentation and stuff like that. And a cool addition is you can request a demo. So without dealing with local installation and development environment, you can try if it really works, like we say. You can enter your email, you get a confirmation, you can confirm, start provisioning, takes about 2 minutes right now. Maybe we can make it faster, but just wait a little bit. I will skip that here to not bore you. And after some time, you get a provisioned Zebra site. And this is a really new demo that we prepared, and it has some nice additions. So let's have a look at the front end. So we have the stuff we already had in the Zebra demo, but we have a new menu item. So we thought about integrating some more data. And a really, really good use case is e-commerce and headless shop APIs. So we now have a working demo of a Shopify headless integration. And yeah, Vera prepared some very nice example data there. You have full integration with the shopping cart and all the article data. All the product content is coming from Neos. So here we have a content-first approach for products, like we'll see in a moment. And our idea is this is really useful if you have a few products, but with a lot of content for them. So it's really a hassle to do that in a shop system. So Neos is much better at managing content here. And yeah, this is based on Vercel Commerce, which we took and integrated into the Zebra demo, but it turned out really nice. And you will get an email with a Neos backend login, and if we log in using the credentials, we can see that you can actually edit the products. And in the top, it's basically the data from Shopify, from the API, but below that we have Neos content elements. You can directly edit product content in Neos, publish, get working. You can use all your content types. You have basically structure the page, the product page, like you would any document page. So it's really powerful, I think. Yeah, just play around, We are happy to hear about your feedback. So, and as an outlook, we will release that demo also as an open source. We didn't manage to put it on a public repo and clean it up so far and provide all the content and integrations a little bit hard-coded right now to our Shopify account. And in Zebra, we also have some exciting stuff coming. So for example, extending the content API for listing dynamic queries. For example, blog and news and articles listing with pagination, solving that at the content API and Zebra layer so it's easier to integrate because now you have come up with your own solution, which is not so easy to get it right. And yeah, I'm also interested in seeing if we can apply the idea of Zebra to other frameworks like Next, for example. Maybe we can have a first project to try that out, because basically this imitation of the front-end rendering of Neos can also be done outside of Next.js, of course. And yeah, that's it for now. Big thanks again to the whole Zebra team and to the awesome Neos community. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we got some presents for you as well. So the very nice insect hotel.
Ah, okay.
I hope
It's a
you.
little bit small.
It
It's for insects. Okay.
Just a small hotel.
Yeah.
Just like 3 or 4 stars. I'm not sure. And then the tea and honey box.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Thanks.
just you got your first fanboy here, because if you find a cell phone that has a zebra on it, it's mine.
Yeah. Nice.
Very good. And we got some questions for you
yeah,
from the
sure.
audience. So quite some. I'm not sure if we can get through all of them, but we're quite good in time.
Yeah. I
So
hurried up a lot.
you did great. Wow. So what are the advantages to implementing a rather static website with a complex dynamic setup like this in comparison to common page rendering?
It's a good and tough question and a fair question. So basically, if you have no experience with the Zebra and Next.js, don't do it. If you don't have the actual requirement, if you want to get your feet wet, try it. For us, we really ask ourselves, if we start new projects, shouldn't we use Zebra? Even if it's now static, why not? We have all the, if you're used to doing everything in React, what I didn't mention, the development experience is much nicer because you have faster refresh and everything just is mainly instantaneous if you have changes. So at least for the most parts, and maybe some parts we have to improve. But yeah, it's like, if you're used to it, why not? But of course, you have to maintain more. It's a bigger stack. It's harder to deploy. But if you figured that out once, why not do it twice? Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
On the other hand, don't do it if it's just a static thing. Like I said, check your requirements. Ask yourself if you have advantages. Yeah. Talk to me.
And the next question is, does the cache revalidation Next.js work across pages the way cache entries and identifiers work in the default Neos caching implementation?
Yeah, it's much more brute force. Everything is revalidated or flushed on every publish, because we still have a little bit of a hen and egg situation. We first have to fetch a node to know how we need to tag it, because we don't know the node type from the route path. We have actually no info in the beginning of the route. So, and we have to pass the tags. Next.js has tags for caching that you can pass to fetch, which is pretty similar to the caching in Flow and Neos then, but you have to provide the tags before you get the data, so you don't know with which node types you have to tag it.
Okay.
It makes it clear.
Well, that sounds good.
Yeah.
This question is more general. Where do you see the biggest advantages for projects using Neos as a headless CMS? Would you also use it for bigger projects? And what disadvantages would there be?
So maybe to start with the disadvantages, we are still innovating here, and there can be rough edges if you need features that haven't been done before, maybe. Actually, I think you can implement mostly everything with that if you have the budget and check it before. And for larger projects, I don't see an issue, because you have more special requirements in larger projects. If you have a lot of risk and strict timeline, it's maybe also not the best idea if you don't have the experience. But yeah.
Good. So last question here. Is it possible to run Zebra delivering the API inside an existing Neos project side by side?
Yeah, sure.
Concise.
So basically what we do is we always call Next.js, and we have some rewrite rules inside Next.js, so you never hit Neos from the outside. But if you just leave your whole front-end rendering in Neos intact, you could put the content API on top, and if you want to use Zebra, go through the Next.js routing, and you use Zebra. If you directly access Neos, you have your old rendering. So yeah, sure.
Great. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for that great talk. And the last one is actually not a question. it is, thank you for investigating this path for Neos and making it a viable, documented open source alternative. And this one goes to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christopher.